some drawings and some examples of some of the light and shadow we've been talking about here. So, in here you can start to see that kind of dark light, dark situation here. So we have this core shadow, reflected light, and this kind of accent shadow here. And as we move away from that accent, the tone simply kind of gradates off, right? And a lot of these other shadows, you can see this far leg. You can see I'm keeping it very simple, right? So, obviously there's a little more to some of these than what we've been talking about, but I think they kind of get at some of the important aspects. So with this, what's important to see with this is how simple the shadows are, and a lot of the details I'm bringing in is really just with using line, right? And you can see I'm bringing in some of the halftone, or not the halftone, but the accents in here, and we're letting that fall off. So that's actually pulling this area forward, and then the rest of her body is falling away, kind of blending together almost with this block here. That first one, this is actually a 20-minute drawing here. So this is like one drawing set. 20 at Art Center, 20 minutes is pretty much the longest you have. So got really used to doing that kind of time frame. Then this is probably like a 10-minute drawing. I kept this really simple. Yeah, and you can see the variety of edges. There's a little bit of shorthand going on in here, in her face and things like that. But again, all the values are very simple. So again, it's not really about rendering, right? It's about organization of values. How do you separate light into dark? And then a lot of the details comes in through that line work. So something like this, I'm not sure how long this was. This was this might be 20 minutes too. But here's a good example of, if you look at his arm here, casting a shadow across his chest. So closer to his chest, or his arm, at his armpit here, this is kind of a common area. You're going to see it. There is, we get this kind of darker accent. And as his chest falls away from his arm, you see how the shadow is lightening up. And we get that edge a little bit softer. So if you do that, it gives your shadows a chance to breathe, and it gives us a sense of the space around the forms here. And as that shadow actually falls off and gets lighter, and as my voice disappears, we feel this elbow here. You see how the shadow in the line work gets darker, and that's working to then pull the elbow forward. So it's always this constant idea of sort of pushing and pulling one thing forward and back. And you can see the leg here, we get this darker shadow, and as the leg falls away, we simply let that kind of fall off there. So we feel that atmosphere, the atmospheric perspective essentially is what it is, kind of influencing that. And we're seeing that same thing happen here at his armpit, right in here, right? Here's a pretty kind of standard example of exactly the type of rendering we've been talking about here. So, you can see these really clear kind of core shadows, and then as we fall off, we just bring this tone in. So it's that dark light. I guess dark would be this line in this case. And one thing to pay attention to here is, as we get this pinch and all these little wrinkles and pinches and things, the cast shadow here is following along each and every one of those forms. So I'm really using it to help me, in this case, describe the turn of the form here. So remember that, again, cast shadows are going to take the form that they're falling over. And you can really see I'm emphasizing that pinch and pushing this oblique up against the hip. We're really emphasizing that overlap here. You can see those dimples, the sacrum, all that information is kind of visible in this drawing. Here's a really good example of that, dark, light, dark. So that core shadow, reflected light, and then this accent slash kind of cast shadow below that, right? And then you contrast that with, certain areas like in here, we feel that deltoid rolling over his arm here. When you squint down, right, you see that kind of blend into the light side. And when you squint, you only see these really strong kind of shadow shapes. So again, it's really about that organization, that separation between that light and shadow. Here's another one. This is a little more subtle. This paper is kind of transparent, so let's get that out of the way. So it's more subtle, but we're seeing all those same kind of things happen. When you squint down, there's still a kind of solid shadow pattern through here, and then we're getting that kind of dark light, dark pattern, that kind of undulating dark light, dark light, dark in here. So even in these tiny little areas, I'm still kind of bringing in that same kind of relationship, right? So I'll kind of skim through some of these here. This is a similar thing. This one has a little more hatching. This is less of a dramatic light source, but we are seeing that stuff happen right in here. This, again, a pretty subtle drawing. This one's actually kind of hard to see. It's so subtle. Maybe if we put this over a lighter page here, you can kind of see it. So this is a good example, too, of how simple I'm keeping my shadow values. Again, I'm not really rendering all these little things in here, but I'm simply using a darker dark value in here to separate his pecs from his stomach, right? And then you see how that's just a gradation falling off as we come out here. So a lot of it becomes just kind of simple gradations moving in and out of the dark. So I think of it like you're pushing in or you're pulling something out, right? Pushing and pulling. It's not so much about sculpting within the shadows. The sculpting kind of happens right at the edge of the values here. So this, here's this one's kind of a two light sources coming in on either side, so we're getting this kind of shadow right down the middle. And a lot of the detail you see on the inside of the shadow here, this is pretty much all kind of line work, right? And each of these tubes you see at this pinch, this is basically following that same pattern of dark light, dark light. It's really compressed, really small, right? Let's see, so we have these here. So these are some quicker poses. But even within these, I bring these up because, again, it's what I'm going for right off the bat is this really simple separation. You can clearly see kind of the shapes behind the shadows. Not trying to be too ambiguous, or I'm not getting too fancy with rendering everything out. And you can look at this leg in the back, right? It just falls into shadow here. Very simple. It's just kind of that 2D shape. So we want that to feel flat so that it pushes back, it recedes. And we want things that are more dimensional to kind of step forward, right? Same thing with this leg here. You can see how this kind of lightens up, right? So that's what's causing it to push behind this darker leg, this darker shadow here. And then we see that kind of disappear towards the back. And even here, this is really subtle, but we feel the roll of her chest, where we feel her chest going back in space, kind of away from us, because we feel this darker value here closer at her armpit. And then as we move to the back, you see the tone gets lighter and it falls off. And that's what's giving it that sense of depth going away from us, right? Let's see. So even in these, really simple, these are like 5-minute poses, you're getting a lot of the same kind of mechanics of light, right? It's just a little bit simplified. Or there's some shorthand involved. So these two, again, similar thing. Again, when you squint down, you get a really clear read on dark and light. And then these other details in the light side, they're not really interfering with these darker values, right? So you want to, again, maintain that separation. Excuse me, just look at this. It's just one simple flat shadow. So yeah, keep the shadows simple. Don't get too caught up in rendering all the things within the shadows. It's again, a lot of the focus is on kind of the edge work and turning that. Here's some feet. A friend called this a foot portrait, but similar thing, again, fairly simple shadows, and then I'm just pushing in this dark accent around her hips to pull this forward. Not too much more to say with this. So these drawings are a little more stylized here, but I bring these up within this context because, again, it's very they're very flat and graphic, and it's a good thing to look at for how simple I'm kind of designing the shadow shapes and things like that, right? And how flat I'm keeping them. And a lot of the detail, all the detail pretty much, is kind of given to us in the shadow side by our line work here, in this case by our overlaps. And here we're seeing this big stretch, and then we're seeing this pinch on this side, so it's that same kind of gesture through here. But yeah, and you see how clearly defined all these shapes are. So I'm making a point to not be too haphazard and too kind of wishy-washy, but I'm actually designing each and every little shape that I draw here, either for form or for gesture in this case. But yeah, a little more graphic, but it's kind of the starting stages that we want to be looking for when we're blocking our shadows in. Geez, how many more? Well, can I go through these quickly? Some more rendering here. Again, this is a little more subtle, but you're seeing, again, look at these accents coming through. So, I guess you could freeze this and, look at these in a little more detail on the recording. Oh, and these are just demos for other classes, for Art Center, I think. But just more examples of, again, really simple shadows, modifying the edges, pulling out those accents, and then bringing in those halftones on the other side to round out the form. Another example, this one has a little more shadow to it, but again, even in the shadows here, I'm not doing a lot of detail or rendering. It's all brought out by line work, right? So the clearer you can communicate things with the line, the less work you have to do with the tone in order to make things read. It's more about, again, that separation. And here you see the same exact kind of value pattern we're working with. Another demo here, so same thing. And I think another demo in here, similar thing. So anyway, guys, I just thought that might be kind of useful to look at